Alrighty, so welcome. It's a wonderful afternoon over here in sunny San Diego today. So I hope that you're all having a good day. And by having a good day, I mean you're doing something good for yourself, for those around you, for those who mean something to you. It's one of those things where what we get up to actually matters. Everything we do as individuals, as occultists, as those that seek to delve into the mysteries of the mysteries, right? And so, what it is that the conversation should be today, right? It should be transcendental magic. What is our equilibrium, right? And so, let's take a look into that. And on page 213, like I said, my copy is different than most people's. I'm not sure if this is a new version or if this is just the redacted version, but it works out pretty good because the text material still stays the same. So, with that being said, equilibrium is the consequence of two forces. If two forces are absolutely and invariably equal, the equilibrium will be immobility and therefore the negation of life. Movement is a result of an alternate preponderance. The impulsion given to one of the sides of a balance necessary determines the motion of the other. Thus, contraries act on one another throughout all of nature and by correspondence and analogical connection. All life is composed of an inspiration and a respiration. Creation postulates a shadow to serve as a bound for light, of a void to serve as a space for the plenitude, and of a passive fructified principle to sustain and realize the power of the active generating principle. All of nature is bisexual, and the movement which produces the appearances of death and life is a continual generation. God loves the void which he made in order to fill it. Science loves the ignorance, which it enlightens. Strength loves the weakness, which it supports. Good loves the apparent evil, which glorifies it. And day is desirous of night and pursues it unceasingly around the world. He who gives receives, and he who receives gives, the movement of continual interchange. To know the law of this change is to be acquainted with the alternate or simultaneous proposition of these forces, is to possess the first principles of the great magical arcanum, which constitutes true human divinity. Scientifically, we can appreciate the various manifestations of the universal movement through electric or magnetic phenomena. Electrical apparatuses, above all, reveal materially and positively the affinities and antipathies of certain substances, fire and water, right? The marriage of copper with zinc, the action of all metals in the galvanic pile are perpetual and unmistakable revelations. Let physicists seek and find out, ever will the Kabbalist explain the discoveries of science, right? So it's like, what is this? Man can produce two breathings at his pleasure, one warm and the other cold. He can project also an active or passive light at will, but he must acquire the consciousness of this power by dwelling habitually thereon. So, like I said the other day, the divine magnetism, right? And we're dealing with the two principles, the active and the passive. What is the active principles of transcendental magic? Well, the active principle is that we're using the divine light. We're using God. We're using the elements of heaven, right? Causes are manifest by effects, and effects are proportion to causes. The divine word, the one word, the tetragrammaton, is self, the tetragram, right? The Jod, the divine name, is the virility of the first principle. I am the finite God, right? And so that is one of the foundations of transcendental magic. It is no longer to accept that man is indivisible from God, but it seeks to elevate the divine qualities within man to become as God, so they become a lesser but still fully realized version of the divine itself, right? And so if you can culminate your foundations of what it is you are supposed to be while you are alive, and you understand and embody these principles, you have transcended the flesh and overcome the divine equilibrium, right? You have overcome the active principle and the passive principle. So that way, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it all comes in full circle, right? You become an emanation. You, as that emanation, are fully realized and fully empowered to do and use whichever of the magical teachings, the mystical mechanics of the rest of the world that you want, right? And so you can make prayer to the undines, the sylphs, the salamanders, the gnomes, and what have you, right? You can evoke the spirits, right? And so with the evocation, that becomes part of magic, interacting with the forces of the mysteries, right? As we covered yesterday or the day before with the Greek magic, right? The interaction between the individual to create the mystical experience so that there's a life-changing event, which is raising individuals up out of the collective to give them that specialized knowledge that changes their perspective on life. That is our duty as occultists, to be able to elevate others, to be able to help others transcend that limitation. And so by that transcendence, become viable as far as what is that next step, right? And so, power of the kingdom, be ye under my left foot and in my right hand. Glory and eternity, take me up by the two shoulders, and direct me in the paths of victory. Mercy and justice, be ye the equilibrium and the splendor of my life. Intelligence and wisdom crown me. Spirits of Malkuth, lead me betwixt the two pillars upon which rests the whole edifice of the temple. Angels of Netzah and Hod, establish me upon the cubic stone of Yetzad. O Gedula, O Gaburiel, O Tippereth, and O Binael. Be ye my love, Ruach Hokmael, be thou my light. Be thou which thou art, and thou shalt be, O Cathariel. Ishim, assist me in the name of the Sabbata cherubim. Be my strength in the name of Adonai B'nai Elohim. Be my brethren in the name of the Son, and by the powers of Zeboath Elohim. Do battle for me in the name of Tetragrammaton. Melachim, protect me in the name of Yod He Vav He. Seraphim, cleanse my love in the name of Elohim, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so we have these evocations, we have these prayers of becoming, and we need to accept that there are aspects of creation that we have to account for. We have to balance those which are divine, those which are infernal. And dealing in the infernal means that we deal in the divine more often than not, because it's the creation of the world as we know it, is the division between the heavens and the earth. But the earth that is in the space of Gebura, which is the sphere of Mars, which is the division of the world wherein the creators needed to be able to create freely where they were not. So, thus, filling the creation, right? That's Kabbalistic lore. Because if you look at the shells, they are the experiences and the expressions of the divine countenance without end, without separation. So everything that you list in the Qliphoth is a divine state. It is a god, technically. It is of the highest order, because it is not separate from the highest order. It is part of order. It is the division of the understanding of that division from man, from these things. And so it should be remembered above all in conjurations, the names Satan, Beelzebub, Adramelech, and others do not designate spiritual unities, but legions of impure spirits. Our name is Legion, for we are many, says the spirit of darkness in the gospel. Number constitutes law, and progress takes inversely in hell as the domain of anarchy. That is to say, the most advanced in satanic development, and consequently the most degraded and the least intelligent and feeblest. Thus, a fatal law drives demons downward, so when they wish to believe themselves to be ascending, so also those who term themselves chiefs are most impotent and despised of all as to the horde of perverse spirits. They tremble before an unknown, invisible, incomprehensible, capricious, implacable chief who never explains his laws, whose arm is ever stretched out to strike those who fail underneath him. They give this phantom names of Baal, Jupiter, and even others more venerable, which cannot, without profanation, be pronounced in hell. But this phantom is only a shadow of the remnant of God, disfigured by willful perversity and persistent in imagination, like a vision of justice and remorse of truth. When the evoked spirit of light manifests with sad or irritated countenance, we must offer him a moral sacrifice. That is, we must be inwardly disposed to renounce whatever offends him. And before leaving the oratory, we must dismiss him, saying, "May peace be with thee. I have not wished to trouble thee. Do thou torment me not. I shall labor to improve myself as to anything that vexes thee. I pray and will still pray with thee and for thee. Pray thou also both with me and for me, and return thy great slumber, expecting that the day when we shall wake together, silence and adieu." That is the dismissal given. And Levi goes on to say, we must not close this chapter without giving some details on black magic for the benefit of the curious. The practices of the Thessalonian sorcerers and Roman Canadeans are described by several ancient authors. In the first place, a pit was dug, at the mouth of which they cut the throat of a black sheep. The psyllae and the larvae presumed to be present and swarming around to drink the blood were driven off with the magic sword. The triple Hecate and the infernal gods were evoked, and the phantom whose apparition was desired was called upon 3 times in the Middle Ages. Next, necromancers violated tombs, composing philters and unguents with the fat and the blood of corpses, combined with aconite, belladonna, and the poisonous fungi. They boiled and skimmed these frightful compounds over fires fed with human bones and crucifixes stolen from churches. They added the dust of dried toads and ash of consecrated hosts. They anointed their temples, hands, and breasts with the infernal unguent, and traced diabolical pentacles, and evoked the dead beneath gibbets or in deserted graveyard. Their howlings were heard from afar, and the belated travelers imagined that the legions of phantoms rose out of the earth. The very trees, in their eyes, assumed appalling shapes. Fiery orbs gleamed in the thickets. Frogs in the marshes seemed to echo mysterious words of the Sabbath, which croak with croaking voices, and the magnetism of hallucination and the contagion of madness. The end procedure in black magic was to disturb reason and to produce the feverish excitement that emboldens one to great crimes. The Grimoires, once seized and burnt by authorities everywhere, are certainly not harmless books. Sacrilege, murder, theft are indicated or hinted as a means to realization in almost all these works. Thus, the Grand Grimoire and its modern version of the Red Dragon. There is a recipe entitled The Composition of Death, or the Philosophical Stone, a broth of aquafortis, copper, arsenic, and verdigris. There are also necromantic processes comprising the tearing up of the earth from graves with the nails, dragging out of bones, placing them crosswise on the breast, then assisting at midnight mass on Christmas Eve and flying out of the church at the moment of consecration, crying, "Let the dead rise from their tombs." Thereafter, the procedure involves returning to the graveyard, taking a handful of earth nearest to the coffin, running back to the door of the church which had been alarmed by the clamor, depositing 2 of the bones crosswise, and again shouting, "Let the dead rise from their tombs." And if the operator escapes being seized and shut up in a madhouse, he must retire at a slow pace and count 4,500 steps in a straight line, which means following a broad road or scaling walls. Having traversed this space, he lies down upon the earth as if in a coffin and repeats the in lugubrious tones. God, I hate that word. "Let the dead rise from their tombs." And finally, he calls thrice on the person whose apparition is desired. No doubt anyone who is mad enough and wicked enough to abandon himself to such operations is predisposed to all chimeras and phantoms. Hence, the recipe of the Grand Grimoire is most efficacious. but we advise none of our readers to test it. And so these are the things that you have to consider. What is your book of art telling you to do? What is your crime that you're going to commit in order to violate the tombs of the dead? Are you digging up the graves to get the nails out of the coffin? Are you simply taking dirt and you're paying for it with water, wine, or whiskey, or tobacco? And these are the things that you can use, right? And so mesmerism and hallucinations and the applications of the black magic of the art, right? Those are the things that get people's stories going. Those are the things that deal with the darker side of humanity, but they don't deal on the perfumes to the gods. They don't deal on the holy offices that the gods are supposed to have, or that you have to maintain with meticulous cleanliness, which unfortunately I have been slacking on. If you see all of my shit around me, I am desperately in need of dusting. But these are the things that we have to consider. We have to consider that when you're looking at the Grimoire traditions, you're looking at things that were designed to violate the norm of society to some degree, to jerk you out of the day-to-day so that you become viable candidates for meeting spirits, right? What is it that you're going to do that's going to jar your psyche open so you can see these individual entities, so that you can meet these things one-to-one? Have you been spending time in a graveyard? Have you been doing your offerings to the dead? Are you elevating those spirits? Are you cultivating a relationship with specific spirits? And these are the things that you have to consider. Are you doing them according to the ancient tradition? Or are you doing it in unverifiable gnosis? Unverifiable gnosis, or UPG for short, is the catch-all term for you sound like a fucking nutter, right? Like you need to go to the loony bin. You don't belong in public society because what you're sounding goes against every traditional outcome, every traditional understanding. And so therefore is unverifiable, meaning you experienced it, but nobody else around you did. Nobody else around you can prove the effectiveness of your work, right? And so the conversion of the Grimoire traditional interactions where the spirit that you deal with are unverifiable to you and others. Like, you know, you had that experience, but do others know that you had that experience? How do others know that you have that experience? Well, you have to be able to share that in a certain way, right? You could, I mean, like I have my stories of interacting with the spirit world, and to be able to recount the interactions that I've got when it comes to path working or the various initiatory things, right? Like, how did I get so good with dealing with the dead? Well, I was raped in a cemetery. It was the first time I had sex, right? No, second time, right? So, like, face first into the dirt, right? And the reason why that's important is because it's a goetic initiation. Goans were the wailers by the graveside. And so for me, it was the dude was screaming. And I wanted to die. I was calling on the dead to assist me, to make my body seem as if it was a corpse. So that way he would stop. And it did. And he started screaming even more. And I was working with the dead in a cemetery I really enjoyed going to. I enjoyed making offerings there. I enjoyed spending the afternoons there because it was like a park, right? And so when you're in those situations and you're dealing with the dead and you're dealing with the way that the interactions go about working with you, there's a power in that. But that's not a power that's reserved for everybody. I'm not saying you should go out and get jiggy with it in a cemetery, or you should go raping people in a cemetery, or set it up so, you know, that's not good. people. Like, don't do it. That's not the way to do magic. But it is an initiation. It is a violation of your entire being, and it is under the counsel and the guidance of the dead that we are able to interact with things in a different capacity. And so for me, dealing with the dead becomes natural. It's an extension of who and what I am now, right? But for you, my viewers, magicians to be, wizards to be, students of the Gray School, or whoever you might be, right? As you practice your magic, you have to consider, what is the thing that disturbs you from normalcy, right? What is the thing that separates you and your experience for having that firsthand capacity? You should not seek to do things that violate the norms of society. And see, this is where the difference in the deviation between acceptable and not acceptable. Why witches get burned at the stake and why priests are leaders of communities, right? It's acceptable magic. It's done in the light of day. It's done in front of others. Others can feel the power and the majesty from it. If you're doing things that violate the dead or violate the laws or disrupt people's normalcy, like shouting on Christmas Eve and violating the sacrament, you deserve what you get, right? And so this is why there are things in this world that you cannot banish. There are situations that you cannot come back from unscathed. And that is the very foundation of the difference between someone who is just reading this stuff for cursory information or someone who is in the life, right? And this is one of those things where you want to make sure that what you're doing matches your unity, your congruency, you in the current of the all that is, right? How are you an extension of being? The divine, right? Why is it that your work needs to carry on? Why is it you want to do this work? What is it about you and this work that you know needs to happen? And what are the alignments that need to occur within yourself and other things? So, that being said, the magician should live in retirement and be approached with difficulty, according to Levi. They may end in madness for those who are not established firmly on the basis of a supreme and infallible reason. Terrible and incurable diseases can be occasioned by excessive nervous excitement. Swoons and death itself, as a consequence of cerebral congestion, may result from the imagination which is impressed upon and terrified unduly. And we cannot sufficiently dissuade nervous persons and those who are naturally predisposed to exultation, women, young people, and those who are not habituated in perfect self-control and command of their fear. In the same way that there can be nothing more dangerous than to make magic a pastime or to do as part of an evening's entertainment. Even magnetic experiments performed under such conditions can only exhaust the subject's mislead opinions and defeat the science. The mysteries of life and death cannot be made a sport with impunity, and these things which are taken to be seriously must be treated not only seriously, but also with the greatest reserve. Never yield to the desire of convincing others by phenomenon. The most astounding would prove nothing to those who are not convinced already. They can be attributed in ways to ordinary artifices and may just inclined among the more or less skillful followers of Robert Houdin or Hamilton. To require prodigies as a warrant for believing in science is to show oneself unworthy or incapable of science. Sanctus Sanctus. Contemplate the 12th figure of the tarot keys and remember the grand symbol of Prometheus and be silent. All those magi who divulged their works died violently, and many were driven to suicide. Caligustro, Schroepfer, Cardan, and others. The Magus should live in retirement and be approached with difficulty. Here is the importance of the ninth key of the tarot, where the initiate appears as a hermit enveloped completely in his cloak. This, notwithstanding such retirement, must be not one of isolation. Attachments and friendships are necessary, but they must be chosen with care and preserved at all price. The Magus must have also another evocation than that of the magician. Magic is not a trade, according to Levi, anyway. Now, I know this, it is a trade, it is a skill set, it is a supplemental skill set. But as a business consultant, as a mentor, as a teacher of wizards, it's not the magic that I'm teaching, it's the wisdom, right? It's the application of that wisdom. It's the experiences of that. I am not divulging my secrets. I am divulging methodologies, but they're not secret. There are systems of science that can be applied again and again and again to the individual under the right conditions to create the desired outcome. For them, they experience it. For them, they get to explore it, and they get to take on in new ways those things which I have talked about, those things which I have developed for the purposes of this science. Alchemical sorcery, right? It's the alchemy, the coming together of the natural and the supernatural in divine union to be able to produce cause and effect. And that's the thing that the Grimoires omit, is that there's a science involved. If you have the skill to craft talismans and phylacteries out of gold and silver, that means you're well-to-do. You have the skill of a jeweler. You have the means by which you can smelt gold, metals, silvers. You have the trade skills of a jeweler, right? You could be a clockmaker. It's like one of the things that I'm looking to do is develop a tea house, a restaurant, a boarding house for budding magicians who are looking to develop their trade in business, in community development, in social networking, in influence training. All of these things I've done and can do, and all of these things are necessary while reserved, while preserving those things. In order to devote ourselves to ceremonial magic, we must be free from anxious preoccupations. We must be in a position to procure all instruments of science and be able to make them when needed. We must possess, moreover, an inaccessible laboratory in which there will be no danger of ever being surprised or disturbed. Then, in this indispensable condition, we must know how to equilibrate forces and restrain the zeal of our own initiative. This is the meaning of the eighth key of Hermes, wherein a woman seated upon two pillars between an upright sword and a balance in the other. To equilibrate forces, we must be maintained simultaneously and caused to act alternately. The use of the balance represents this double action. We must be able to observe and act on that observation. We must appear to be non-moving, but move. And so, sitting and pontificating, like, that's the thing. When you are watching these videos, there is an element of action, right? I am expressing to you that action of, this is magic, folks. This is what we're doing. This is how you do it. This is what the books say about. This is some of the experiences about those things. This is examples of how you can apply those things. And so, if you're looking to do things as a religious leader, as a follower of faith, praying to a god is not enough. Offering to a god, not enough. What do you must do? What must you do? Right? You must sacrifice, make sacred some action to deliver something to the higher principles, What are the higher principles in this case? Well, in this case, it would be that the devotion to the craft to improve it and others' relationships with it and themselves and you, and create the entire schema of what is a training system that provides both power, influence, authority, leadership, and connection. So that way, what we're doing is we are creating the entire magus. We are creating the entire individual so that they may retire at the end of the night and do their magic. They have all of the skills necessary to be able to create what it is that they desire, while demonstrating at the same time the level of proficiency to be able to talk about these things, to be able to work with these sorts of things in full unity, that this is who they are, right? You get the opportunity to work with the dead. Great. You can go to the graveyard, sit by the graveside, cry out for the dead to come forth, right? Or you can be sitting by the graveside and sobbing because your loved ones have died and they've crossed over into the other side. Those are very viable activities, very viable things. And so when you're trying to do these things on purpose, taking a little bit of the graveyard dirt, blessing it by the name of the spirit, calling upon them, knowing their history, knowing who they were, doing your homework on them, that's part of learning how to do necromancy in a beneficial way. And the necromantic art is, while the books talk about the darker aspects of it, but there's also the willing aspect of it. The inclusion of ash or bone or photograph or name sigils or the sacred herbs, like the spell of the day this morning, between the Althea, the maidenhair fern, and the wood betony, in order to be able to produce a spirit puller that prevents evil attachment, right? So that you draw in the grace of the spirit that you're working with, can be intermixed with the ashes of the dead that you loved in life. You could keep that in a locket, and you could make that a phylactery that protects you, that keeps you, and it works with you as a spirit familiar would, as a servitor type energy. Or you could put it on the altar as a thing of worship, like with a Govi on the Voodoo Essence altar, right? The house spirits that you elevate and you cultivate those relationships with. So what you have and how you do, these are the things that you come to organically, right? You enter the house, you've got the Govies on the counter or on the shelves, on the altars, right? You pay them just as much reverence when you approach, right? You've got a nice clean area. You've got it all dusted. You've got it all perfect, right? Everything made the way it needs to be. And those are part of the traditions. That's part of making sure that the tables are clean. It makes, I'm not conjuring spirits in my apartment right now. I'm making the means by which they can be conjured. So yes, everything becomes a mess. But when it comes time for actual ritual use, everything gets dusted. Everything gets put away. The altar gets pulled out, and the table's dressed, and the incense made, and sweet smelling perfumes, or sometimes foul smelling perfumes. Sometimes some of them are quite foul. But these are the things that you have to think about, is how are you embodying the traditions? I mean, the guy that wrote this book was so badass that Crowley himself thought he was his reincarnation. Let that sink in. Crowley, the modern author of most of what is Western witchcraft, most of what not Western witchcraft, but the Grimoire traditions, the ceremonial traditions, the Thelema, the Silver Star, the post-Golden Dawn Freemasonry cults, right? And so the idea of the Golden Dawn is a beautiful concept. But so is an academy. So is the Grey School, teaching and creating, and giving dialogue force. So that way there is friendships that can be asserted. There is communities which are developed, that are cultivated, so that kids that are getting abused because they have the skill sets of magic and they're not being trained on magic by their family out of fear can seek solace with the gray school if they are accepted as students, right? And they can have that after school program implemented across the country if we get it done right, you know? And that's one of those things where, like, the gray school is one of the most amazing things that I could possibly express, because it gives you a place where you can go and wear the fun hats. You could wear the ritual robes and you're not looked down upon. You're expected to be a jovial wizard. You are expected to be the magic, right? And that's the thing. A lot of traditions, a lot of people go about it and they don't have the power to back it up. They're all about the aesthetic of it, but they're not about the training behind it. And so if you have the training behind it, by all means, wear the clothes, wear the robes. I'm going to be, I'll be wearing a pointy hat coming up here the next couple of weeks once it gets delivered. I've already made that arrangement. And so that will become an extension of myself, is the persona that I create, right? But it is through that persona, the personality of the teacher, the mentor, the wizard, the whatever it is that needs to be for this community, right? But it's not about the disruption of the norms in negative ways, right? So walking down the street wearing a big pointy hat, that's not normal nowadays. Back in the day, it used to be, back when hats were more of a thing, when air conditioning and having to walk everywhere and keeping the sun off your face was a good thing, right? But, it's one of those things where, as we go through and as we read up on transcendental magic, and as you make your magic grow, as you cultivate the dark, the light, you have to know the spirits of both, because within both there are benefits. There are evil spirits within the light. There are evil spirits within the night. There are good spirits at night, and there are good spirits at the day, right? Your ideal should be able to pacify those good spirits at both times, to be able to send off those that are evil and corrupt, vile and foul-smelling, right? Like, that's the goal, isn't it? Isn't it to be able to have the power over your day-to-day? And if you're getting ridden by a spirit that calls itself a god, is it really a god? If it's not elevating you and changing your station in life, if it's not serving your desires, it's not a spirit. And see, that's the thing. Gods don't serve your desires, not the way that you would expect. If you make prayer, or you have communication with an entity and it calls itself a god, and you're not doing it in the classical way, you're not doing the chthonic rites, you're not doing any of the prayers in the language of its origin, right? You're not writing your own prayer or even using any of the iconography associated with that individual entity. How are you sure that it's actually the entity that you're talking about? And see, this is why Christians are so fascinating to me, is because they have their churches and they have their big statues of the Christ hung up before the entire congregation. See, this is what we have to work with. This is what was the ideal, that somebody believed so much in their faith that they were willing to die for it. So then why haven't we made martyrs out of every witch that was murdered, every queer person that was marginalized, every person who has been abused and tormented? Because they, like us, are just human. right? Or are they not? Are they not something more, an expression of the divine, because they live in a different way? They have energy that's different than the everyday person, right? But the everyday person is only the everyday person because they choose not to engage. They choose not to enhance their psychicism or embrace it. If they have it and they're afraid of it, getting over that fear, and that's one of the things is with this kind of thing, if you're going to be an expression of the divine, you can't fear who you are and what you have. Why? Because to fear it is to willingly give yourself over to the dark, right? You might not understand it, you might not have full control over it, but you shouldn't fear who you are. If you have, you've been abused. That's abuse. You should be happy that you have the capacity to learn these things. Yes, it might take years of training. Yes, it might be a lifetime vocation. But isn't that the point? You're here for a lifetime to learn things. Your body is the body that it is specifically because it needs to be for the lessons of whatever it is that need to be taught, right? That's why suicide is such a sin. Is because you're taking away the opportunity to learn, to develop, to cultivate those aspects. So no matter how dark the path gets, no matter how twisted the road becomes, you have to figure out, are you more clever than the problems that surround you? Are you more viable of an expression of the principles which you offer as an expression of the divine itself? Every single soul, there's 7 billion souls alive on this planet, give or take. And there's many, many trillions more that are dead. So it's the ones that are alive that need to make way for more of the living, to be able to improve the world, not take from it, to not push it to the threshold of war and famine and disease and plagues. Man-made plagues should not be a thing, people. And yet they are. And so we have these opportunities to change, to be better, to cultivate higher, to transcend our limitations. So this is why I like to study transcendental magic. It's interesting. So you read and you look and you play with your understandings. You go back and forth between, is this a thing that you want to do? Is this going to be the thing that changes you? Is this going to be the thing that allows you to take your next steps in creation and go for that bit of magic you've always wanted to do? And are you doing it to actually change your fucking life, or are you doing it just to be an egotistical prick? Because I am sick to death of those fucking uppity magicians that think they can just conjure up a spirit because they want to have a chat with it for no particular reason. That is ego. You interact with these things because there's a purpose, because there's a need, because you have a project you're working on for something bigger than yourself. Or even if it is for yourself, it's something that's bigger than the moment that you're in that situation. You don't, I mean, some people do. They'll just call people up and they'll just waste their time on the phone talking about nothing because they needed to talk. That's what your gods are for. But your spirits, the familiars that you conjure up, the ones that you give to and you get from, those are tools, aspects of the creation that are meant to work with you. You can talk to a hammer all day long, but until you use it to nail a piece of wood together, it's not gonna fulfill its purpose. A spirit that you're just bullshitting yourself with, that you think it's a spirit or think it's something worth worshiping, that's That's like trying to make friends with a hammer. It's not your friend. The hammer can be used by anybody, right? You can put as much anima into it as you want, but if somebody puts the same amount of anima into their hammer, then you have two gods of the hammer. And if they go squaring off with each other, whose ever anima is stronger, whose ever foundations in this tangible world with a tangible action with that hammer is going to be more successful with it. Right? It's the difference between picking up a hammer and hitting your thumb instead of the nail and a master carpenter who can build a house or can shape metal, or the blacksmith who uses the hammer daily versus a carpenter who uses a hammer in a different fashion to put things together versus to actually shape their entire creation. Delicate, finessing scrolls of metal woven as finely as glass. Delicacy, precision, science, skills. These are the pursuits of mankind. Humankind. Womankind. Whatever you are. Doesn't fucking matter. The point is, if you're watching this and if you're thinking about these things, good. This is what it means to think about transcendental magic. Transcendent stuff, folks. What is going to take your skill set and make it transcend? Right? How do you transcend your limitations? How do you transcend the situation that you find yourself in? That is the skill of the magician. That is the skill and the purpose of transcendental thought. And how do you embody the divine while you do it? That's what we have to do. Those are the things by which we have to do them. And that's why it's a lifetime vocation. Like, I could teach you how the basics of conjuring in a week. I could get you to do it within 7 weeks. Right? We can get you full on spiritual evocation in 7 weeks. How do we do that? You're going to go through a purification process. All the while, you're going to be learning how to do it. So by the time you're ready to do it, it's good. 49 days. Right? Most books of magic say you should be purified for 45 days. So if we take 4 days to get you ready to cleanse, and then you're ready to do it, and then there's an entire 7-week course. Every day there's reading of sacred scriptures. Every day there's thinking about the interactions of these things. Every day there's the mixing of ingredients and the offerings of these ingredients to that spirit on that day, in the hour of it, etc., etc., etc. That's what it means to do the perfumery. That's what it means to do the higher art. That's what, because you're making the art become elevated. You're doing it for a high purpose. You're doing it to connect with the divine. You don't undertake it because it's boredom. It's a Friday night and I have nothing better to do because I just haven't been going out with my friends and I don't have an Xbox that I'm going to play with anybody online, or I'm grounded from my Xbox. Like, come on, guys. This isn't shit for kids. I mean, kids can learn this stuff. I encourage it. I started learning this shit when I was 13. You know, I had mentors by the time I was 15. I was hanging out in all the stores, right? The bookstore, the import store, the bead store, the other bookstores, like magic shops in other cities. Like, come on. It's important. It's relevant. And it's through that relevancy that you gain understanding and to have that facility for understanding. And this is why those friendships, those mentorships, those life lessons are so important. So that way what you get and how you get it and why you're doing it and the cultivation of capacity of who you are is important. Because without it, you're just another ego-driven magician doing black magic and dealing with spirits that you don't comprehend because you haven't taken the time to comprehend them. You know, Take the time to comprehend what you're doing, the weight of it. What does it mean to the spirits to be able to use the holy dirt, to use the water that's been mixed with bone, mixed with somebody's life, to light a candle with the herbs and call on things that have been called on for thousands of years? That's a different type of practice. It's a different type of understanding. And this is where it becomes the impetus of the transcendental magic user, right? This is why the rite of transformation in the Grimoire of Arts is so important, is because it gives you the ability to connect with all that power of nature in as much skill as your body is able to possess. And then you spend the years to refine it. You don't practice to gain power, you practice to get better with it. But if you don't have it in the first place, or if you don't have access to it, or if you haven't given it to yourself, then that's the difficult part, right? If you haven't gone through and made it so that you are a sacred vessel for yourself to inhabit, why would anything else deal with you? Even if you go through dark shit, how do you use that dark shit to come out better? How do you use that dark shit to make it so that way what you do isn't so bad? So that way, no matter the situation you find yourself in, you can figure out a rosy ring around it, or you can, that's a plague reference, sorry, you can figure out a better way forward. And that's the thing, is like, are we doing this because we're inaccurate? Are we doing this because the words that we say are empty words and we'd have no follow-up and action, right? So in the Grimoire of Arts, there are sections: general mechanics, creation, ascension, elemental, alchemical, gate magic, blood magic, shadow magic, demonic magic, union rites, funerary rites, exorcisms, lapidary magic, which is stones people, herbal formularies, sex magic, arts of the mind, where you just do mental work and projections, time magic, blade magic, right? Stuff that can stab or cut or create, right? And then there's a bibliography. And that's the thing, is like, that took a long time to create each of those sections, right? Not all of it was once-offs. Every single thing gets used, some more than others. But these are the sections that built the Grimoire of Arts. Those are the sections of practice that were at one point the best of the things that I could conjure, the best of the things that I could do at the time, or the most commonly used things at the time. That was 10 years ago. Over a period of 10 years. Actually, it was more like a period of 11 years, because I started as a junior year project, but it was all the spells and all the magic that I had been working on since I started this shit. So with that, my friends, I'm going to say that the Grimoire of Arts Volume 2 is going to be just as interesting as the first one. And it's going to take on some of the same and similar and different challenges that the first one took on. The first one takes on, you've read all the books. Now what? You've done all of the spells of the modern day, but you're still not getting effect. Or you've understood that you have to take your place within the watchtowers of creation. You have to extend your consciousness between the different planes. And so that way, by your extension of those planes, you are able to see and partake in the next levels of your development. So that's the thing. The workshops, the live videos in the afternoon, those are practice. Those are supplements for going through and refining information, conversations that become a broken record. Things that I've said time and time again, day in and day out to people, depending on what they ask in the forums, in the chat rooms, on the Facebook, on the social media, or whatever it is. Like, if you don't specifically deal with the symbols of the things that you're working with that have been handed down in ancient times, if you don't use it in the language of the thing you're working with, the original language, not in English. Yes, it's thought controlled, but you have to be able to link your thoughts to what they thought. Without that, that's a key to power that you lose. That's why I don't make conjurations in Norse. I don't make conjurations in Hebrew as often as I probably should. I don't do Greek invocation. I try to avoid it if possible. And the reason is because I'm trying to cultivate an English-speaking tradition for English-speaking individuals that can allow them to access the same kinds of powers and the principles and the currents and the applications of them, but without having the cultural biases of the past, without having those, this is the requirement and this is only the requirement. Like, these are techniques of sorcery that span centuries, arches between cultures. And that is the study for the Department of Magical Practice. It is the practice of transcendental magic. You are transcending your limitations on every level that you can. You are constantly in a cycle of growth. You are constantly on an upswing. Yes, things might be shitty. Yes, those things might be happening, but there are recompense for it. There are ways around it. So that way, what you go through, how you go through it, how you present yourself, and you create as a result of those things. That's what this project is for. That's what these videos are for. So I hope you get some foundational information out of this, and that it's not just stuff that you've heard 100 times over. While I might have said it to 100 different people, I hope that you that watch this video come to find it in a new light, that you get the opportunity to study and refine your own doctrine. You get to study and create new kinds of magic, initiations, right? You get to initiate yourself. An initiation is a preservative against the false lights of mysticism. It equips the human reason with its relative value and proportional infallibility, connecting it with the supreme reason by a chain of analogies. Hence, the initiate knows no doubtful hopes, no absurd fears, because he has no irrational beliefs. He is acquainted with the extent of his power, and he can be bold without danger. For him, therefore, to dare is to be able. Here, then, is the new interpretation of his abilities. His lamp represents learning. The mantle which enwraps him is his discretion, while his staff is the emblem of his strength and boldness. He knows, he dares, and is silent. He knows the secrets of the future. He dares in the present, and he is silent on the past. He knows the failings of the human heart, and he dares make use of them to achieve his work, and he is silent as his purposes. He knows the significance of all the symbolisms and of all the religions. He dares to practice or abstain from them without hypocrisy and without impiety, and he is silent upon the one dogma of the supreme initiation. He knows the existence and the nature of the great magical agent, and he dares perform the acts and give utterance to the words which make it subject to human will, and he is silent upon the mysteries of the great arcanum. So you may find him often melancholy, never dejected or despairing, often poor, never abject or miserable, persecuted often, never disheartened or conquered. He remembers the bereavement and the murder of Orpheus, the exile and the lonely death of Moses, the martyrdom of the prophets and the tortures of Apollonius, the cross of the Savior. He knows the desolation in which Agrippa died, whose memory is even now slandered. He knows what labors overcame the great Paracelsus and all that Raymond Lully and condemned to undergo, that he might finish by a violent death. And he remembers Swedenborg stimulating madness and even the losing of reason in order to excuse his science. Saint Martin in the hidden life. Cagliostro, who perished forsaken in the cells of the Inquisition. Cazotte, who ascended the scaffold, inherited of so many victims, he does not dare the less, but he understands the better the necessity for silence. Let us follow his example. Let us learn diligently when we know, and let us have courage. And then let us be silent. Right? Let us be silent to those who need to be silent, those who don't have the skill to speak, those who don't have the reason by which they can utter these things, if they don't have the full understandings, if they don't have the words to hear, or the ears to hear, the eyes to see, the words to speak, that are true, that are coming from a place of truth, they should be silent. Students should be silent. I'm a student forever. That is an absolute fact. But on the stuff that I teach on, this is stuff that I've been working on for decades. And it's stuff that, while it might get me a sticky end someday, I hope that it helps those along the way so that they don't have to suffer. That if you're a psychic and you're afraid of your skills when dealing with the dead, you won't have to be. That if you are incapable of understanding that there are different ways to come at power that are outside of traditional initiations, such as the violations in cemeteries, such as the one-to-one interactions of a summoning of a thing at a crossroads, those things are viable. Those are ways to get at power, but is that the power that you want? Is that the power you want represented? Or do you want to represent yourself and the things that you are talking about in a positive way? So that way you move forward with creation. You move forward as an agent of creation and not of destruction of yourself or someone else. So with that, my friends, I will leave you, and I will see you tomorrow morning for the Spell of the Day Challenge. Week 11, day number 5. Stay safe, my friends, and remember, don't be evil. I wish you a very happy day today, and I look forward to seeing the comments. I look forward to seeing how we get to illuminate each other. And this is the end of St. Bridget's Day, right? Sunset last night till dawn this morning. So be safe, my friends, and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.